So, how many hours did it take you to beat your first Hollow Knight playthrough? Because my first 100% completion file has me logged in at just over 50 hours. Some of you probably have me beat on that, in fact a lot of you probably do. But 80 plus hours of content that I obviously haven't gotten tired of sounds like it would warrant just as hefty of a price tag. But nope, this game is as much now as it was when it was released last winter. At the debatably undersold price of $15, you could be picking up literal days worth of content depending on how much you enjoy it. I know how it can be, it's 1 AM and you have a paper to work on, but Haloness just can't stop calling your name, and eventually you give in, and, well, you know, you get the idea. With how many hours of entertainment you get out of exploring the kingdom, some people have even actively tried to persuade the developers to hike the price up a little, just as a means of being able to fund their projects a little more comfortably. But as rushed and as malnourished as most games on the shelves really are nowadays, I've been thinking about how that $15 price tag probably would have changed if particular companies happen to be holding the reins. So let's actually dive into this game and break down how much this game is really worth. This includes extremely subjective data that I found, such as the hours it takes for one to complete a game, and other things like whether or not the game even retains your interest long enough for you to complete it. So to avoid relative numbers and things like that, I'm just going to be talking about averages that I found searching around the internet. So after I poked around on a few Steam forums, I saw numbers like 30 being tossed around for standard completion of the game, while others said it took up to 60 hours to run through the game and all its DLCs, completing absolutely everything you can. If you were me and you ass-dragged your way through the first playthrough because you liked exploring and finding new things, well, that number's probably closer to around 40. But if we don't have any games worth a fair comparison, that number doesn't mean that much to this video. It would mean just as much if it was 80 or 120 hours to complete the game. Having realized this, I started looking up average playtimes on the game it gets compared the most to, which just happens to be the Dark Souls franchise. You can grab information from polls on the internet, and it looks like the average hours of standard completion run at about the same, which is give or take 30 hours. So in terms of sheer hours played, that would be enough to say this game is at least worth a $60 price tag. If it were only that easy, right? Entertainment value is one thing, but that's far from the be-all end-all in determining a game's worth. Look at the production value of games like Dark Souls and other Bandai Namco titles. They have much larger teams, much more demanding sequences of code to look over, modeling, animating, and voice acting that Hollow Knight didn't really have. Also, keeping in mind that Bandai Namco had resources and a budget that would probably quintuple that of any indie team, to put it generously. But then you have titles like Cuphead, whose budget and assets could be easily compared to a developer like Team Cherry, and with a $20 price tag you get an average of 12 to 15 hours of total gameplay on your standard first-time completion. So it's definitely not unreasonable to expect this game to sell just as well with a $20 price tag as it did with only $15. Hell, I wouldn't let $5 extra get in the way. But that leaves us standing between a gap of $20 to just below $60. Now that's a pretty huge chasm right there, so let's try and change that a little. One of Team Cherry's means of updating Hollow Knight with continuous free content is the big reason why people have suddenly taken to their computers with attitude pointing out Team Cherry's overly generous take on releasing content. First with the Hidden Dreams update, and then with the Grim Troop, which was roughly as much content as the previous, and now on a silver platter, we're being served what we are told is the largest free content update so far. Jeez, guys. So that's 3 free content upgrades, basically averaging around 2 to 3 hours per content pack. And if we are to assume Gods and Glory is the largest of the 3, then I'll go ahead and slap a flat 5-hour runtime on that one just to keep things simple. So let's say about 10 extra hours of content altogether, considering you haven't played through any of them and are picking them all up for the first time. Again, using Bandai Namco as an example here, it looks like running through a laundry list of all their paid DLC, we're seeing an average price tag of anywhere between $15 to $20. Anywhere from Bloodborne's 8-hour-long Old Hunters expansion to the Ashes of Ariandel, which reportedly only took those with an adequate enough level to complete it around 3.5 hours to play all the way through. But once again, the production value of those expansion packs were much higher than what underground teams usually dish out. So just for the sake of throwing numbers around right now, let's take 5. So that's $5 for the Hidden Dreams, and roughly the same for the Grim Troop expansion as well, and considering production value of these expansion packs as well as the 2 to 3 hours average playtime on both of them, paying a flat $5 seems pretty fair. And I don't know about you, but if I saw those prices in Steam and I knew they were going to be as good as they were, I would have dropped this amount with no hesitation. Since we've been given reason to believe Gods and Glory is the final and largest free expansion to the Hollow Knight universe, let's go ahead and double that one to 10. Seems reasonable enough. Brushing over what we have so far, that's arguably $20 for the vanilla game, plus another $20 for all of its DLC so far. Now if that sounds like a lot, try and remember your very first playthrough with Hollow Knight, and remember how long it really took you to get through the game. Not only that, but if you were one of the buyers that simply couldn't get enough after that and decided to poke around in Steel Soul mode, completed the Coliseum, found all the charms, and got the secret ending, you debatably put more hours into this game than most AAA titles. So coming from what we've went over so far, I'd go out on a limb and say even $40 is slightly more generous than what it probably could have gotten away with. This is where we need to start thinking a little outside the box here. I think it's time for an economy lesson real quick, so stick with me on this. The $60 standard for purchasing video games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne has been around for longer than any other pricing standard. It was closer to $50 back in the early 2000s, and around the PS3 and Xbox 360 era, we started seeing games being tipped closer and closer to the $60 standard we have now. But that's where it stopped for some reason. A new copy of The Witcher 2, for example, would cost you just as much in 2006 as a copy of The Witcher 3 would have costed you in 2015, despite there being such a huge discrepancy in the spending budgets of those two games. But if you bought these games at a time in which they were relatively new, you paid around the same for them. And then you have companies like BioWare and LucasArts that somehow managed to sink over $100 million into the production of a single IP, compared to the estimated $5 million budget you were looking at for a game such as The Witcher 2. The only reason that $60 standard hasn't changed with the production value is because the market basically discovered one day people don't really like the idea of paying more than $60 for any single video game. And what do you think is going to happen when the demand for new content goes up, but the asking price stays the same? Yep, you guessed it. Microtransactions, paid expansion packs, $400 collector's box editions, Game of the Year expansions from games that never even officially won that title. Weird. It's because while the demand for games to look better and fulfill the specs of the platforms they were being sold on, there was still little room for that $60 price tag to be bumped up any higher. So inflation ensues, and now you get companies like EA using microtransactions and loot box systems to scrape at whatever revenue they can get. And looking back at the current budget for an average video game being released in 2017, the 5-digit backing Team Cherry garnered from their Kickstarter suddenly starts to look pretty flimsy. And that's really the point of all this. What you would be willing to pay for a game like Hollow Knight versus what the same game is actually worth will always be two completely different numbers. In the year 2008, when Modern Warfare sold for $50, a game like Hollow Knight probably would have received criticism for the $15 price tag it has now. But 10 years later, a game with 10 times that budget would still have roughly the same price standard. If a $6 million game like The Witcher 2 can disappear off of shelves for $60, then the $26 million spending pool of The Witcher 3 would have to be hitting shelves at almost $300 USD just for the asking price to stay consistent with the budget. And I don't think I have to explain why that doesn't work. An industry where the standard asking price for a product was around $300 would probably have the same effect on other games like Hollow Knight, quintupling the value up to $75. And with DLCs included, if it were to be priced relative to other games and meet the $40 mark we discussed earlier, then you're looking at a product that could potentially be asking for about $200 for every single purchase. Now that is fuck nuts insane. I'm perfectly fine with Hollow Knight staying at $15 where it is now, but there are always plenty of other ways to support the team. buy the soundtrack, buy duplicate copies of games for your friends, even browse the merch store and pick up a shirt or something. I don't even have a Nintendo Switch, but you know damn well I'm going to be picking up a copy when it comes out. Measuring the exact amount of what any game is worth ultimately depends on the demand of the game, and there are way too many numbers to crunch to get into that. Let's just count our lucky stars and be thankful those prices I listed off earlier don't exist. If you made it to the end of this video without my economy talk boring you to the verge of insanity, then I really want to say thanks for sticking with me. Hollow Knight has rapidly turned into one of my favorite games, and it's nice to see a community so receptive to what I have to say. Sub if you haven't, ring the bell if you want to stay updated, and I guess that's about it. Thanks for tuning into The Forge. Keep it real, my dudes. See you next time.